Prosecutors have started their closing arguments in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The rap artist and music mogul has pleaded not guilty to multiple charges that include racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. If convicted on all counts, he could face up to life in prison. And the CBC's Chris Reyes joins me now with more from outside the courthouse in New York. Chris, you were just inside the courthouse, though, and you were listening in to the proceedings. What have you heard so far?
Hey, good afternoon, Arthi. First, let me paint a picture for you of what it's like inside, because that's one of the most striking parts of this case, given how famous Sean Diddy Combs is. I mean, this is a guy who not too long ago received a key to New York City, and he's known for being this sort of bombastic, razzle-dazzle hip-hop mogul. But inside this courthouse, Arthi, he's just another criminal defendant. And what I saw through a big screen in the overflow room is a man dressed all in white with white hair, sitting with his defense team, having to listen quietly as the prosecution explains to the jury why he should be found guilty of these charges. The closing arguments from the prosecution started about 10 o'clock this morning. It's expected to last for the rest of the day, about 4 hours long. If you're wondering why that long, well, essentially the prosecution has to tie together 6 weeks of this case in which they presented 34 witnesses, and they have to walk the jury through that testimony and the evidence and try to connect the dots for them and try to convince them why it proves their charges, which is essentially that Sean Combs used his massive business as a criminal enterprise to coerce people into participating in these so-called freak-offs, these marathon drug-fueled sex sessions that involved a number of his ex-girlfriends and some male escorts. And let me tell you what we heard in the opening lines of the prosecution's opening statement. Christy Slavic described Combs as a leader of a criminal enterprise, someone who doesn't take no for an answer. And they argued that Combs used power, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. Quite notable, Arthi, there was a lot of time spent explaining the racketeering charges in this case. So racketeering, defined legally, is a pattern of criminal activity over a period of years. And in describing this case, the prosecution used some parts of the testimony that's been heard over the last 6 weeks, that Combs instructed his staff to procure drugs for these freak-offs, that he used a threat of force over some of his ex-girlfriends to participate in these sex sessions, and that he threatened many of them. And really interesting, Arthi, is the prosecution really underlined that they're not trying to criminalize dysfunctional relationships or unconventional sexual preferences. They said in the context of those freak-offs, actual laws were broken, and they were broken over a period of years. They also made sure to highlight for the jury that these freak-offs, they don't have to find them criminal every single time, because remember, this happened over a period of years with people that Sean Combs had long relationships with, and they acknowledged that there were ups and downs in those relationships, and they told the jury that they only have to find that, one freak-off contained one criminal activity to find him guilty. And I think what we're really seeing with these closing arguments is the prosecution drawing a big difference between their case and what the defense will say in their closing arguments. That, again, that these were lifestyle choices for Combs involving adults that consented to many of these activities.
And speaking about the defense's closing arguments, we know that they won't be delivered until tomorrow. What are you expecting to hear?
That's right. And also important to note, Arthi, that they did not call any witnesses themselves, that Sean Combs chose not to testify. Instead, they're really relying on the extensive cross-examination that happened over a period of these six weeks. And remember, even in their opening statements, they acknowledged that these relationships that Sean Combs had with some of these women were violent in nature, that many of his sexual preferences are unconventional, to say the least. But really, the crux of their argument is that these activities involve consenting adults, and adults who had really something to gain from engaging in these activities because they gained proximity to his fame, access to his wealth. And we can expect that in their extensive closing arguments tomorrow, that's what they'll really try to prove and convince the jury about. Also important to note, this is pretty conventional. The defense did file a motion to dismiss all of these charges. The judge hasn't ruled on that. And so until that ruling happens, everything will just go according to schedule. So closing arguments tomorrow, and then we can expect the jury will have this case by next week and possibly a verdict before the end of the week. Next week.
Thanks for this, Chris. That is the CBC's Chris Reyes in New York.